You know, you can think, I said, I'm not out here to prove to anybody that they exist at all. I said, I know they exist. And I say, you know, there's no question. They say, well, is there a little bit of question? Is there a question whether you could have been fooled? I said, no way. No way.
Among the dozens of Bigfoot videos filled with legends, only one has divided scientists and enthusiasts for decades, the Patterson-Gimlin film. Today, we will show why this footage is still considered the strongest evidence and why it might be real. Shot on October 20th, 1967 at Bluff Creek, California by Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin, this 59-second short film is regarded as the most famous and clearest footage of Bigfoot. So what is the truth? We will present all the evidence objectively. First of all, I must admit that when I saw this video for the first time in my life, I thought it was fake. But later, when I examined the points that people emphasized, I had to move away from the costume claim to a large extent. So what were the parts that initially made me think this was a hoax, and what were the details that later convinced me otherwise? Most of us, when we watch a video that is claimed to show Bigfoot, automatically think, this must be fake. Our minds tend to believe either that Bigfoot does not exist at all, or that those who capture such footage are simply staging hoaxes for money. When I first saw the Patterson-Gimlin film, I approached it with the same bias. However, upon closer inspection, certain details shattered that negative perception and convinced me the footage could be real. Speaking of negative details, the first thing that caught my attention was how the creature seemed to look directly at the camera, almost as if striking an iconic pose to reveal its face. The second detail was that the creature appeared shorter than expected. Witness reports generally describe Bigfoot as being between 8 and 12 feet tall, 2.5 to 3.5 meters, with some even claiming heights of up to 4 meters. The figure in the Patterson-Gimlin film seemed to fall short of this legendary size, as most technical analyses estimate Patty's height to be between 6 feet 6 inches, about 198 centimeters, and 7 feet 4 inches, about 198 centimeters, 224 centimeters. Therefore, like skeptics, it was possible at first glance to say, too short, within the range a large man in a costume could portray. However, when we look more closely at the height issue, this alone does not prove the film is fake. Among humans, we see great differences in height within the same species, from 1.5 meters to over 2 meters. If Bigfoot is indeed a real species, it is perfectly reasonable to expect height variation among individuals. Moreover, while legendary reports sometimes describe heights of 3 to 4 meters, many researchers suggest those accounts may be exaggerations influenced by fear or misperception. A figure of around 2 meters, as seen in the Patterson-Gimlin film, actually makes it biologically more plausible, not less. Just as humans show differences in body structure and height depending on age or population, it makes sense that a Bigfoot species could also vary in size, young, old, or regional individuals. The third negative detail that caught my attention was the creature's foot soles, which appeared smooth and uniform in color, almost like a costume. But there are some important points to consider here. First, the film camera used in 1967 was very low resolution compared to today's technology. It is perfectly normal that we cannot clearly see the fine details of the soles of a moving figure. Also, the soles of a living primate's feet do not necessarily have to look cracked or dirty at all times, especially when walking on soil or sandy ground. They can appear smooth and uniform in color. In fact, it is said that the creature in the Patterson-Gimlin film had just come from a sandy area. This would reasonably explain why the soles looked smooth. Alternatively, what we see could also simply be an artifact of the film's technical limitations and distance. The soles also appear the same color as the ground it was walking on. The creature was near a creek, likely having just crossed it. What we saw on the soles may have been nothing more than sand or soil sticking to them. In some frames, this residue can even be seen spreading toward the back of the heel. Moreover, in a costume that included details like moving muscles and even breasts, details that puzzled scientists, it would be illogical to ignore the soles of the feet. Thus, I had found answers to nearly all the negative details I noticed, but the aspects that pushed me toward believing the film were the far more intriguing ones, details that clearly indicated this could not have been a costume. 1. Moving toes. For example, while examining whether the soles of the feet were fake, I noticed that the toes were moving. The foot itself was enormous, far too big to belong to a human, and Patterson could not have known that, with the film quality of that era, we would be able to see the toes moving. In other words, he would not have bothered to include such a detail that he assumed would be invisible. 2. Moving leg muscle. When we carefully watch the video, we can observe the leg muscles of the creature in motion. Especially during the walk, the muscles in the calf area can clearly be seen contracting and relaxing. At that time, creating a costume that could reflect such natural muscle movement was nearly impossible. Neither Hollywood's makeup technology nor the special effects of 1967 were advanced enough to make muscle fibers move in sync with footsteps. If this were a costume, the muscles would have appeared as fixed fabric pieces, moving independently from the body. Instead, in Patty, we can clearly see the muscles tensing and loosening with every step. This stands as one of the strongest pieces of evidence suggesting that the footage may depict a real living being. 3. Chest detail. Another striking point is Patty's chest detail. In the video, we can see the figure's breasts moving naturally with each step. If this were a costume, achieving such a realistic effect would have required an extremely advanced internal mechanism or special effects technology, something that Hollywood itself could not accomplish in 1967. Moreover, we must ask, why would someone faking a film make things harder by creating a female Bigfoot? Normally, the easiest route would be to portray a simple, muscular, flat-chested male figure. Adding breasts would only increase costs and raise the risk of exposing the hoax. If the footage were staged, making it this complicated simply wouldn't make sense. 4. Costume experts' opinions. Over the years, many costume designers and researchers have analyzed the footage, but none have reached a definitive conclusion. In 1979, about a dozen of the best costume designers of the era were working on The Empire Strikes Back. In interviews, all of them said the figure in the Patterson-Gimlin film could not have been a costume, because none of them had the ability to make something like it at that time. The only name mentioned as a possible candidate was John Chambers, the designer of the Planet of the Apes costume. But Chambers himself openly stated, "I didn't make this, and I don't think anyone else could have. This is not a costume." When we look at the history of ape costumes, this judgment becomes even more significant. Patty's hair texture, body width, and limb proportion are simply too unusual to be mimicked with a suit. Planet of the Apes was released in 1968, 1 year after the Patterson film. John Chambers, the Oscar-honored designer of Planet of the Apes, himself said that Patty looked too advanced to be a costume. In fact, in the 1990s, a rumor circulated claiming Chambers actually made the Patty costume, but this was never proven. On the contrary, his friends completely denied it. Special effects professionals and costume designers like Bill Munns have repeatedly pointed out the same issues. Muscle movement, especially in the thighs and calves. Creating such a muscle suit in 1967 was nearly impossible. Proportions, long arms, short torso, broad shoulders, for a human to fit inside either a deformed body or a special build would be required. In other words, if this was truly a costume, it would have required technology far beyond the Hollywood standard of 1967. Even in major productions like Planet of the Apes, 1968, and Star Wars, 1977, no costume achieved the realistic muscle and limb detail seen in Patty. This is exactly why the PG film has remained debated for over 50 years, because either a real, living being was captured on film, or a costume that nobody of that time could have made was somehow created. But then the real question arises. If even Hollywood, with all its resources, could not achieve this, how could two amateurs with limited finances possibly have done it? 5. Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin's financial situation. Another important point was the financial situation of Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin. Before the film, Patterson was struggling financially, often borrowing money from people around him. He was not a professional filmmaker, nor did he have any connections to Hollywood. Gimlin, on the other hand, was simply a cowboy, a farmer, who worked with horses. To create such an advanced costume, one would have needed Hollywood-level special effects experts, a serious budget, and professional materials. In 1967, a costume of that caliber would have cost thousands of dollars, and there was no way Patterson could have afforded it. Moreover, the alleged suit was not just a fur-covered garment. It would have required an incredibly sophisticated design for that era, something capable of simulating moving muscles, joints, and natural body proportions. For Patterson and Gimlin to finance or produce such a technology on their own was virtually impossible. Therefore, the skeptics' claim of a simple costume becomes very weak when you consider both the circumstances of the time and the financial means of Patterson and Gimlin. Just look at any film from the late 1960s. If this had truly been a suit, it would have been a treasure for these two men with little money. They would have sold it to Hollywood for millions, because nothing of that quality existed at the time. 6. Gait analysis. Patty's walking style is different from that of a human. The long arm swings, the way the knees bend, and the weight distribution were reported by biomechanics experts as being a non-human gait. Modern motion analysis software has also confirmed this difference. 7. Scientists' opinions. Dr. Grover Krantz, Washington State University, anthropologist. One of the academics who studied the film most extensively. He argued that Patty's body proportion, long arms, short legs, broad shoulders, do not match those of a human. He emphasized that the natural muscle movement shown in the footage would be impossible with a fake costume. He concluded that the figure in the film had to be a real primate. Dr. Jeff Meldrum, Idaho State University, anatomist/primatologist. Still, one of the most well-known Bigfoot researchers today. He conducted gait analyses, examining Patty's stride length, heel movement, and foot motion. His conclusion: there are clear differences from human walking. The knee joints and weight distribution do not match human anatomy. He stated, if it is a hoax, then someone in 1967 managed to perform a gait that even modern biomechanical research cannot replicate. Dr. John Napier, Smithsonian, primatologist, initially approached the film with skepticism, but after detailed examination he admitted, if it is a hoax, then it is one that would have pushed the limits of even the best special effects experts of that era. So while he did not say it was definitely real, he acknowledged that it would have been an extremely difficult hoax. Some academics from the American Anthropological Association claimed the figure could be human, but most pointed out the abnormalities in body proportions. Several specifically reported that the shoulder width and arm length do not correspond to those of a human being. Patterson and Gimlin, not profiting from the film. After the film was shot, Patterson did try to sell and showcase it. He made some money from small documentaries, TV programs, and university screenings. But it is well known that Patterson never became wealthy from it. When he died of cancer in 1972, he still had debts. In other words, the film never brought him riches. Gimlin, on the other hand, earned almost nothing from it. In fact, for years, he avoided interviews and distanced himself from the subject because he did not want to be labeled a hoaxer. Only in the 2000s did he begin attending conferences upon invitation from researchers. But this was more in the role of a witness, not for commercial gain. The truth is, if any of us had genuinely filmed Bigfoot, we too would want to profit from such a recording. Therefore, even if Patterson or Gimlin had made money from the film, that alone would not prove the footage was fake. But the striking point here is that they did not make large sums from it, which suggests that money was never their motive. In fact, think about it. If they had really created a costume, selling that costume alone would have earned them more money, and they would have done so without the stress, ridicule, and accusations. Bob Gimlin himself said that he and his family endured heavy pressure for years because of this incident.
The first 35 years was difficult. Around where I lived, gee whiz, I was a real outcast. And so, and I had a job and all that, you know, and so even, well, the guys that I worked with, they believed in me and stuff, but the other folks didn't, you know, they just said, and my wife worked at a savings and loan institution, and so she worked on the teller line for a while, and they'd come up and say, hey, God, you're Bob Gimlin's wife. You know, we thought that, oh, Bob was a sensible guy, but he goes down there in California and comes up with a weird story that he had made a film of a Bigfoot. So it hurt a little bit.
No comparable footage in 60 years. Even after nearly 60 years, as of 2025, No recording has ever matched the realism of the Patterson-Gimlin film. Today's technology is far more advanced. Cinematic effects, CGI, and professional creature suits are at an incredible level. On platforms like YouTube, people can make millions of dollars with hoax videos. If Patty had truly been a hoax, it should have been replicated or even surpassed many times by now. But here's the striking point. Even in today's world, where fakery runs rampant, not a single piece of Bigfoot footage has come close to being as convincing as those 59 seconds captured in 1967. That fact alone shows why the film still stands as the strongest piece of evidence to this day. So, what do you think about the Patterson-Gimlin film? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading them all. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and support us with a hype rating. And of course, you're all invited to join our Discord community, where cryptozoology enthusiasts from around the world gather.